You guys, the 2020 experience is here, and I could not be more excited to share this with you. It is a culmination of the many years I have spent participating in high-level masterminds and the many years of leading masterminds. Quite frankly, it's what I desperately want myself, and I think is needed and is completely missing. I don't know anyone else doing this. And so I put it together just for you. It is for 32 ambitious women who are ready to make 2020 their year. It involves a larger mastermind of 32. It involves a smaller mastermind of 8. It involves accelerators to really dig deep and get momentum when you need it most. It involves one-on-one expert coaching and services. It involves 3 in-person meetings, 2 of which are at Miraval, which is a luxury retreat, which really in and of itself transforms every part of you because it allows you to tap into the wellness and the mindset and the peace that is needed in order to truly go after your dreams. This entire year is intended to help you go bigger than you've ever gone before, to really get outside of your comfort zone and to leave behind those old patterns, those old excuses that keep showing up over and over again, and they're holding you back and keeping you from having the life that you really want. So this program is not for the faint of heart. It is only for those who are 100% committed and ready to go all in, ready to leave their excuses at the door and to really show up in a way that they've never shown up before for themselves, for their families, for their careers, for a group of women that perhaps they've not experienced that before. A tribe of women who are really at that high level, supporting you, pushing you, and challenging you, and calling you on your stuff so that you can be the best version of yourself. It is going to be a year of intense hustle and intense flow, and it is going to change lives. And the ripple effect is going to go far beyond just this group of 32 women. But it is here. It is ready for you. If you're looking for a breakout year in 2020, you can apply at 2020mastermindexperience.com. Welcome to Hustle and Flow with Heather Hubbard, episode 136. Hi, I'm Heather Hubbard, and I was a litigator, partner, and practice group leader at an AmLaw 200 firm. I know what it takes to rise to the top. I also know all too well the toll it can take on your personal life. So how do you shine bright without burning out? How do you embrace your ambition without selling your soul? You're listening to the Hustle and Flow podcast. Welcome back. I am your host, Heather Hubbard. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Today, I am sharing with you why I started a podcast, whether you might want to start your own podcast, and if so, what does that look like, and how do you put it together? I am sharing with you absolutely every piece of equipment I use and our entire process. And we have a freebie with a checklist and all of the links and all of those details for you on this week's episode. To grab that, all you have to do, and it's, like I said, it's free. All you have to do is go to hustleandflowpodcast.com/136. And we will put that link, as opposed to all the other links, in the show notes this week so that you can just go there and then download that PDF with your checklist and all the information that you might need and want to start your own podcast. So a lot of people reach out and they'll tell me, I'm going to start a podcast. Do you have any tips? And it's like, oh my goodness, a ton. It would take forever for me to share that. And I had a bar association, several people, reach out because they wanted to start a podcast and they wanted to know how I did it and all the stuff. And so at some point I thought, it would just be easier for me to record an episode so that anyone and everyone who ever reaches out and asks, I can just point them right here. So hopefully this is going to be of value to you and you will have all the secrets. You can do it yourself. Okay, so question number 1 is, should you have a podcast? There are many reasons why you might want a podcast. It could be to market your services. It could be to really set you up as a thought leader and an industry expert. It could be to, be an educational resource so that your current clients or someone else, like you have this information and you just want to set it out so that others can use it, right? In the same way that I'm doing this episode on how to start a podcast, you may want to be able to share your wisdom with others for no reason other than you just like to share your wisdom. It could be that you want to do like a creative endeavor or a creative outlet, something completely unrelated to your career or your business. There are many, many different reasons why you might want to start a podcast, and they are super popular right now. It is a great platform at this moment, and it's only growing. The demographics are perfect for me. Most podcast listeners tend to be college educated, and they're super popular with people in their 30s to 50s. Well, that's my demographic. So it made sense for me to have a podcast. My guess is if you're listening to this podcast, you too are a professional or in business. So if you're wanting to use it for marketing or to educate your clientele and they fall within that same category, it might be a great fit. On the other hand, if your potential audience who you're wanting to reach does not fit within those demographics, you might want to go find a different platform where your target audience is more likely to hang out. So that could be YouTube, right? The younger folk like YouTube. And sometimes for those who, if you're not dealing with, college educated audiences, then you might want to go to Facebook. So Facebook Live or Facebook videos there, that might be more popular for you. So just figure out where your audience is hanging out. Podcasts are where a lot of my audiences are hanging out. And what I love is that a lot of people have never listened to a podcast, but one of their friends will tell them to. They hear it enough. They finally figure out, where is the podcast app on my phone? They finally figure it out. And then they start listening to all kinds of podcasts. And they're like, how was this missing from my life? So that's first and foremost, is just what would be your purpose? What are you trying to achieve? And then make sure that your ideal audience is actually the kind of audience that's already listening to podcasts in the first place, because it's one thing to record things and put it out there. It's another for people to listen, right? I mean, most of us record podcasts for the purposes of others listening as opposed to us just doing the recording. So if you think that you want a podcast and it can be great exposure for you, then you want to go about putting together what that plan looks like. Now, full disclosure, I've shared this in a previous podcast. We talked about it in episode 88, the Facebook ads with Rick Mulready, because Rick is the one who actually encouraged me to start a podcast. And I was like, I don't have time for a podcast. I don't want a podcast. And he was like, but your personality comes through when you talk and you're so animated. That would be a much better platform for you than a blog. And I was kind of hating my blog at the moment. And so he had told me, he was like, you need to get this going. And so this was in late January, early February. And I was like, okay, well, I'll set my goal for June. And he was like, that's ridiculous. Absolutely not. You can get it out much faster than that. Like maybe, what about sometime between April and May? And then I was like looking at the calendar and, I was like, well, Mercury retrograde is going to be going on. And that's never a good time for technology. So I was like, well, let's just do it now. So I went from I'm not doing a podcast to actually releasing my podcast within a matter of 3 to 4 weeks. I don't recommend that for most people, but if you too have some time capacity and you can just go all in, that's great. Otherwise, you might want to give yourself a little bit more lead time. So here's what I did. One, I just started asking questions of others who already had a podcast. So I asked, like, who's your editor? What equipment do you use? So that I didn't have to figure any of that stuff out. And then I hired help. I'll go into all of this in more detail. And then I simply focused on the content and the launch strategy. So depending on what all you're going to be doing for yourself, it might take even more time. So when it comes to just logistics and understanding how it works, so Pat Flynn, back when I did this, he had an entire tutorial walkthrough on how you start a podcast, every little detail. And so I can't remember if they were videos at the time or not, but I did all that. I followed the steps he told me to follow. And I just looked. And so this is the link that we'll provide in that freebie PDF. He has an updated version for 2019. And it's how to start a podcast. So that's step number one, is you want to at least familiarize yourself with that. Even if you hire a lot of it out, it's step by step. It's really good. It tells you what to do. And then I started coming up with, okay, well, what will the marketing look like to support this? Because here's the thing, just because you create it and put it out there doesn't mean that anyone's going to find it. Even if you're doing, you're trying to use the right keywords, or you're hoping that, Apple or some other podcast app will just pick it up. Unless you already have a huge audience, that's probably not going to happen. So you just need to go ahead now and think, how am I going to get this in front of people? So what I learned from Pat's course, and I'm sure I read some other stuff too, but his was the best, so just go look at that, was that your first episode tends to be telling your story and explaining what the podcast is going to be about and what people can expect, including, is this a series? Does it have seasons? How often are you going to be coming out? Because consistency is really important for building an audience if that is what you're looking for. If you're wanting just one-offs, people randomly come to you occasionally, which I don't recommend. I don't know why you would do that. You really want to be able to tell people what to expect because they're going to come to rely on it. I will tell you, when I take weeks off, when I do breaks, our numbers always go down and I don't immediately recover the next week. So consistency is important. Knowing how long your format's going to be. People don't want you to mix it up that much unless you tell them that on the front end. So mine, I shoot for 30 minutes. Sometimes they go over, but I never do 45. Never, never, never. But some people like an hour. Some people like 15, 20 minutes. You just decide what you want, commit to that, and announce it to people in episode number 1. Then you want to go ahead and have other episodes. So don't release just one episode. At the time, Pat had recommended that you have 3. So when you go live, there are 3 episodes right there in the queue. So there's studies that show that if people like you, they just want to start listening to you and they want to start to binge listen. And if you don't have anything in your library, they're not going to want to subscribe immediately, but they're going to forget to come back. So what you want is for people to listen to enough stuff that they're like, this is really good. I want to make sure I get all of this person's stuff, and then hit that subscribe button so that it's automatically downloaded into their podcast app as soon as it comes out. So we went ahead, we released, and we had 3 episodes on the very first day. And then we had additional episodes. So I think we released 5, maybe even in the first week. So we came out with, I think, 3 on Tuesday. And then maybe we had the 4th one come out on a Thursday, or 2 come out on Thursday. I don't remember the exacts, but I can tell you, you want to have enough out there and you want to do it faster than you normally would on the front end, again, to try to get people sucked in and excited and hitting that subscribe button. From there, you then just follow whatever you said you were going to do. For me, it's weekly. Every single Tuesday, that's when you get a new podcast episode. When it comes to getting it out there, again, you can do all kinds of tips and tricks on the keywords and trying to figure out how you can get on the new and noteworthy and all of that. Again, if you don't already have a big audience, you're going to struggle with that. So what I recommend is you figure out, who all do I know that will potentially listen to this or share with friends that they're listening to this. And so this kind of goes to, you need to email everyone you know, you need to post on all the social you know, you need to let your mom and your dad and your friends know, even if that's not your ideal client or your ideal audience. you just want to share it with anyone and everyone, you could always do a release depending on your industry with like an industry magazine. You might put it on listservs. You want to ask others to share it around. That's the main thing, is you just want to tell anyone and everyone you know that you've done this, you've put this out there, and to encourage them to not only listen, but to subscribe and to leave ratings and reviews. So when I had put mine together and I knew it was coming out and it was ready, I had reached out to people that I knew would support me, right? This is the same way you would do a book review, and said, hey, I'm releasing this podcast on this day. Will you listen to it and leave me an honest rating and review? And so I had, I think 10 people lined up who were like on it, that were ready to do it. And they did it. Because that's another thing. Sometimes if it's new, people look and they're like, they don't know you, right? They're like, well, how many people have rated this? How many people have reviewed this? So go ahead and just have people lined up, ready and willing to do that for you. And then I don't do this as much as I should, but you want to ask in your podcast episodes for people to remember that one of the ways that they can give back is to leave a rating, to leave a review. iTunes is the most important. I think they now just call it the Apple Podcast as opposed to iTunes, but same thing. That one really is the most important. So just asking people to do that, reminding them to do that. You can definitely run contests around it. You can run freebies. You can have others like do giveaways for you. You can get super creative in how you might do that to get people listening to the podcast. But if you're only going to do one thing, just reach out to anyone and everyone you know, have some people lined up to be able to give that rating and review, and then ask them to please subscribe so that it will automatically be downloaded into their app. Okay, so let's talk about everything that goes on and all of the equipment that I use. So I purchased all of my equipment through what's called BSW, Broadcast Supply Worldwide. I bought a podcast package, and I knew the kind of microphone I wanted, so I found a package that supported that. They're constantly changing out their packages, so I'm not even going to get on there and tell you what is there now, because if you listen to this episode a year from now, it's going to be different. But here's what I have. My microphone is a Heil, Heil PR40, a Heil PR40, and I have a few accessories. I have and I'm probably not using the right technical term, I have the pop filter in front of my microphone. And I also have what's called a boom. A boom is something that attaches to your desk so that your microphone is, right, so it's like hanging in front of you, and it's intended to basically take any movements or shock and that not come through the microphone. So that is a Heil HB1 microphone boom. I also use what's called a Focusrite Scarlett. And the reason I got that was because, again, it was just in the package. And I like it, but it sometimes causes me issues. It is a USB, so it just plugs right into my computer. But it's a way for you to do the audio and to do the gain. It's a monitor. It mostly works really, really well. It has been giving me issues with Zoom, which I'll talk about in a minute, but I'm more or less pleased with it. I'm not about to get anything new in the meantime. And I got one that was super easy to set up. You can get really complicated in your controls, but the Focusrite works pretty well when it's just me. I use Adobe Audition as my recording software. I think that costs me about $21 a month. There are a lot of free recording software out there. I like Adobe. I like how I can set markers for my editor to let them know, like, this part needs definitely to be edited. They're going to try to catch it anyway, but it's super easy for me to hit that. I can easily see what's going on with sound levels and all this other good stuff. So I found that to be the easiest. So I use Adobe Audition to record when it is just me. When I am interviewing a guest, I use Zoom. And Zoom is what I also use for all of my programs where we are doing video conference calls. When I am doing a podcast, we don't use video. We only use audio. So our microphones are on, but our video is off. And the reason why I do that, well, one, I don't do podcasts that actually are recorded. But when you're using Zoom, because it's online, if you're using video, it requires more bandwidth. And so you want your audio quality to be as good as possible. So you want to turn that video off. So even if you and your guests want to say hello to each other with the video, when you go to record, turn it off. And if you can both be directly actually plugged in with the Ethernet to the internet, that's far better than Wi-Fi. But of course, that's not always possible. Your guests may not have professional great microphones like you do. So you might just encourage them. You might give them options on what a microphone could use. A lot of people use Yetis. I have a Blue Yeti that I use for some of my webinars and other things. I think it's like $120. I think like the Heil is maybe closer to like 400 or more. The Heil is definitely a more professional microphone that is used in recording studios. And I think you can probably hear in my podcast, they sound really good. So if you want that really high quality sound, you want to invest in a really good microphone. So on Zoom, I'm still using the Scarlett sometimes, although I will say since like April or May, I've been having a ton of issues with that. And I have been doing all kinds of things trying to fix it. So when we've been recording my guest interviews, if you've been listening lately, you've probably heard that the sound quality is not as good. And that's because we've not been able to use my really nice microphone on those. I can't even use my Blue Yeti on those. I'm having to use just my microphone speaker because Zoom is not cooperating. So this is part of doing a podcast, right? Like you've got technology issues that might work at first, and then stuff comes up and you have to start troubleshooting. So we're working on some solutions to that now, but that is what I currently use. And it was, again, never an issue until just a few months ago. To schedule my interviews with my guests, I use Acuity, and I use that in my business for everything. It is an online calendar system. If you don't want Acuity, I think the other big option that a lot of people use is Calendly. And you can set your availability for when you're able to record. You can just share that link with your guests and it allows them to find a good time. They schedule it, and then you can have a confirmation on there that tells them what to prepare for, what to expect, and anything else like needing a bio or a picture and the link to Zoom. So it just streamlines everything. Now, I will tell you, I think I've shared this before, depending on how long you've been listening, you may or may not know this. I don't like podcasts that are scripted. To me, you can totally tell when something is scripted or not scripted. You can tell some people, I'm not going to name names, like they're reading. I don't want to listen to somebody reading. And, part of what I do, and if you ever hired me and worked with me, is I'm very off the cuff. So that's what you're going to get on the podcast. So with my guests, I don't do outlines. I don't do agendas. I don't write all of the questions. And sometimes my guests get really anxious about that. But I want to have genuine conversations. And I may have some ideas of what I want to talk to them about. But I personally don't like to prearrange it because I don't think you get genuine conversations and you're not in the moment. You're just waiting for your next question to be asked, right? Like you're just waiting for them to wrap up so that you can ask the next question that you've both already agreed upon. I like the spontaneity of a genuine conversation. You may not feel that way. Just know how you're going to do it and you can let them know in advance. And we're actually trying to improve our process. But the way we generally do it is once we record with a guest, we let them know when it's going to come out. We prepare social media graphics to support it. We share it with them as well so that they can send it out to their people and they can cross promote. I will also tell you, most people are happy to be on a podcast. When I reach out and ask people if they want to be on my podcast, I've only had one person actually tell me no. Everyone else has always said yes. So it's, I think, fairly easy to get guests. I mean, I get there might be some amazing guests that you're I don't know if they would say yes or not. Shelley Zalis was one of those people for me from the Female Quotient. She is amazing. And quite frankly, I thought out of my league, but she was so generous and happy to come on. And if you missed that episode, definitely go back and listen to it. That was 110, episode 110, if you want to go back and listen, Rewriting the Rules with Shelley Zalis. So that's another tip for you. I actually had someone early on say, what you do about referring back to episodes is brilliant, because as soon as I listen to an episode, I then go listen to the other one. They were like, is that intentional? Yes. 100% yes, that is intentional. So what I just did there was intentional. Now, I don't pre-script it, but as soon as I have a thought and I share it, what I just did was I push pause on Adobe. Okay. I push pause in my Adobe Audition, and then I pick up my phone. I get the podcast app out with my podcast and I scroll to find it. And then I tell you what the episode number is. When you just say there's podcast episodes you've done, people don't know how to go find it, because you can't, it's not like other things where you can just Google, because if you don't have the whole transcript out there, people may not be able to find it. So go ahead and tell them what the episode number is. So that's a little tip and trick you can use to get people going back and listening to older episodes where maybe they just found you and they don't go back to the beginning and binge listen. Tell them where they can go find stuff. But so come up with your list of who you might want to interview. Assuming you want to do interviews, you might just do all solo. I will say I get a ton of people pitch me that want to come on the podcast, and I very rarely say yes. Sometimes I do. But know that once you start a podcast, you'll be getting a ton of pitches. And just heads up on this, if you don't want to start your own podcast, but you do want to be a guest, make sure you've listened to the podcast and you actually understand what it's about. Tell that host why you like something, maybe mention a particular episode that you liked, and then tie in how you would be happy to speak on a certain topic if it was of interest and of service. Here's what you should not do. These are the ones that I get and immediately delete. It's basically like a publicist or someone pitching on their behalf. And it's like, hey, here's this guy. And by the way, it's generally, here's this straight white guy. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you listen to my podcast, and if you've ever looked at my guest list, you know that I'm about empowering women and diversity. So you at least need to know that angle and like address it up front. And so then they're like, here's the book they wrote, and they're amazing at all of these things, and you need this person. And it's like, you don't know me, and you're not explaining to me why you like me or my podcast, and you're also not telling me how like their opinions fit in with mine and it would be a fun conversation. Like, it's a cold pitch, and I know it's a cold pitch, and it's all about the person, right? It's all about the person being promoted, not in any way about me and my audience. So there's a tip for you on that. Okay, so much to share. I can't believe where we already are on the time. All right, so my artwork. I hired a graphic designer to do that. I did not skimp on the price on that because I wanted it to look good. So you can do your own if you want. You can do that on Canva. Canva is a free online software that you can use to do graphics. They've got a ton of templates. I use it for a lot of my social media. There is a way that you can upgrade to get more stuff, but you absolutely can do whatever you want right there on Canva. But if you're wanting it to look really professional, I do encourage you to hire a graphic designer. I hired for this particular piece, GIF Studios, Joanna Galveo. She's out of Porto, Portugal. All right. So then you are going to submit all of your stuff to iTunes. That's a whole process. You need to read all of that. It doesn't just go live just because you're submitting it. You're going to want to come up with your description. You're going to want to come up with your title, all of that good jazz. I'm not going to go into the strategy of all of that. Just know you got to get it prepped and you want to put a little bit of thought behind it. You might want an intro. I have an intro to my podcast. And if you're going to use music, as a former copyright lawyer, I need to tell you, make sure that you're not just pulling any music. You need to make sure you have a license. I use royalty-free licenses. I pay for the license, right? So sometimes you can get royalty-free, like just free stuff. Unsplash is a great place to do that for photography. For music, if you want to pay for a license, you want to make sure that it actually covers the use that you're using. I use Pond 5. Pond 5 is where I get my audio. I can purchase it and then I can use it on the podcast. And then my editor is the one who mixes it. So I recorded the vocal for the intro and then he put the music to it. And that's what we use. We also have outros. I occasionally change the outro, but the intro is always the same. I mean, maybe one day I'll change the graphics, maybe one day I'll change the intro, but as of now, it works. When it comes to actually getting it up and running, you're going to need a platform. I use Libsyn. So with Libsyn, you submit all of the information there, and then it sends it out to all of the podcast apps. Like, you have to set it up in Libsyn. I can't give you the details to that because I did not do it. So many people ask me questions on things related to the editing and the publishing. I don't know. I hire that out because I don't have time for that. And so that's the thing. If you're wanting to do this all on your own, if you're not wanting to hire someone to help you with any of this, just know that every single episode from beginning to end may take you several hours. If you're going to record it, you're going to edit it, you're going to upload and publish and all the stuff, it's going to take some time. I don't have that kind of time. So I hire it out, and I encourage you to do the same. So Libsyn will get it prepared and set up where it goes out to all of the apps. Now, I also provide it on my website. And so I encourage you to do that too. And you're going to need something for it to actually play. We use the Smart Podcast Player. That is by Pat Flynn. So you pay a yearly fee, and people can come to your website and just play the audio there. Just know that does not count as a download. They're just basically streaming at that point. Even if they download it, which you can do, it's not going to show up in your statistics. So when people talk about the downloads they have, it's just downloads from podcast apps that are supported through Libsyn. They can't track what's just being listened to on your website. And we also publish ours to YouTube, and that doesn't count towards it. But I just want it out there, right? Because downloads are sometimes a vanity metric anyway. I mean, it can give you a ton of great information. And in fact, we track it. Like, I have the numbers set up in a spreadsheet for me to review every single week. So I can see exactly how many of the new episode is being downloaded, as well as the total for the entire week on the entire podcast. Because it just lets me see what people like and don't like, and trends as to what's happening. Okay, so here's my process. Kind of come up with content, and I use Box. I know a lot of entrepreneurs use Dropbox. The corporate world uses Box, and I'm from corporate, so I use Box, box.com. And you can get a free account on Box. We have a business one, but you can get a free one. And so that's how we all work together. So we have an Excel sheet in there that says, every episode number, whether or not there's a guest, and it includes information like what's the title, all that good jazz. It's set up in there. And then when I go to record, I just get it all set up, get my Adobe Audition, and I record it. From there, I save it to an MP3 and I upload it to Box in the folder. And then I tag my editor and my assistant and say, here's the audio. And then I'm mostly done. I don't know what they do from there. So my podcast editor, a lot of people ask because my podcasts do sound great, is Matt Mawaney at Podassist, but bad news, he's full up and not taking new clients. So you can always check out his website, but maybe there will be openings, but finding a great podcast editor is super important. So they handle all of the audio. They, put it together with your intros and your outros and the music, make you sound really good, edit out anything that needs to be edited, and then really prep everything. So Podassist, they don't just do the audio, but they go ahead and draft our show notes. I do review and edit the show notes, and then they get all the links together, and then they get it uploaded into Libsyn and ready to publish. So I don't have to do any of that. And then my assistant is also involved through the entire process. So once Podassist has the audio ready to go, Justin listens to it to make sure that it sounds good, to make sure there's, nothing where something should have been edited out and didn't. He listens for that, and then he approves it. I'm not involved in that process at all. And quite frankly, I don't like to listen back to my podcast episodes. So I don't. Unless I'm looking for something in particular. Like I said, I don't even draft the show notes. Matt's team does that. I will edit them just to make sure that, it makes sense with what I'm trying to say. And then Matt and my assistant, they get it published, right? So I don't know how all that happens. And they're the ones who set up Libsyn, iTunes, all that good jazz. You should do the same. Hire out people to figure that out and to help you. And if you're like, where do I find that help? Well, if there are others you know who have a podcast and you think their quality sounds good, then just reach out and say, hey, do you have an editor? And if so, do you mind sharing their information? I mean, it's that easy, right? So you can do that. You can also hire a virtual assistant on the podcast. In fact, that's what I did. That was the very first time I actually had hired up much help, was just for the podcast itself. So that's how you do that. You just put yourself out there, you make the hires, you get people to help you, and you set it up and you were good to go. And then you just show up and do the work. That's it. That's how we put together our podcast. So you want to keep it fresh. You want to have new ideas. You want your content to be interesting. We now have had so many episodes. We now even have a directory. So if you go to hustleandflowpodcast.com/directory, we tell you all of the different areas, everything from like changing careers to personal development, professional development, mindset, goals and time management, all of that separated out. You can click the button and then you get everything under it. So you can really play around, do a lot with it. You can do freebies and downloads just like we're doing with this episode, which can help grow your email list and get to work with people even more. Again, if you want to grab the PDF with all of this information in the checklist, just go to hustleandflowpodcast.com/136. All right. I hope that was helpful. If you start a podcast and you use this, let me know. And if you ever hear anyone talk about wanting to start a podcast, whether it's an organization, a company, a person, tell them, hey, there's a really good resource over here. It's absolutely free. Go check it out. I hope that has been of service. Have a great week, and I'll be back next week with a special guest interview. Now is the time to get your application in for the 2020 Mastermind Experience. If you are an ambitious woman ready to make 2020 the year where everything changes, the year where you put yourself first, where you tackle your excuses and your fears so that you can begin to create the life and career that you truly want, you want to check out this program. It was created for you. Our rooming list is due to Miraval on November 4th. That means you need to get your application in now so that you can be considered for a seat on this rocket ship. You can learn more and apply at 2020mastermindexperience.com.